And together with my colleagues, Russell, Christiana at HUMLOG Institute based in Hanken School of Economics today, and also our partner from Aidonic company. This is a very good opportunity for us to present our research work, some of the key findings, and hopefully we're going to have a very good session. I'm really impressed by the magnificent number of the participants for our special focus session. About 250 participants from different organizations, from NGOs, international NGOs, from the local government agencies, and also research institute. So I think there are like a lot of space for collaborations together between the academic, humanitarian operations. So yeah, hopefully we're gonna have a very good session today. I'm gonna share my slides to start our presentation. Do you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so today I'm gonna start with a discussion about just a brief introduction about the Cash and Voucher Assistance and some challenges and kind of recommendations made by humanitarian practitioners based on our data collections in Middle East. And also Russell, my colleague, will continue the discussions about cash and voucher, specifically joint procurement in different contexts. Some sites gonna be shared. And so hopefully it's gonna be a very good session. And then at the after our presentation, we're gonna have an open session, panel discussion. We're gonna raise a couple of questions. And if you have any questions during our presentations, you're welcome. You can either write in the chat box, or you can just raise your hand and just unmute yourself and then talk. So because there are lots of humanitarian practitioners today are like participating in our events, definitely you have a better field experience than us. So we were not able during the lockdown to go to the field, but we just do the remote data collections. But so definitely your experience, your comments definitely will add to these presentations, and they are welcome. And so just a bit introduction about myself. I'm Amin. I'm a researcher and lecturer at Humanitarian Logistics and Supply Chain Research Institute called HUMLOG Institute at Hanken School of Economics. It's based in heart of Helsinki in Finland. So, and this background is like the entrance hall, the gate for our school in Helsinki, and this lab. It's like getting the weather warmer, so it's like very good weather here we have. I actually also received my PhD based in University of Saints, Malaysia. So I used to live in Southeast Asia. I'm quite familiar with the system structure of the humanitarian organizations and governments, and I've done a lot of work with them based in Malaysia and Thailand. And also I'm originally from Iran, so I always had like kind of challenged myself to connect with the local practitioners, including Iranian Red Crescent. We had very fruitful session last couple of years with them. And because, Iran is one of the countries like affected by 40 kind of different disasters. So it's like quite people are like kind of experienced in this area. And this is my email address. So please do reach out if you have any questions or you want to collaborate later on in any kind of research or training. We are welcome. And maybe quickly, a little bit introduce our HUMLOG Institute. As you know that HUMLOG is like established in 2008, so almost 11 years of experience in teaching and research in areas related to humanitarian logistics and supply chain. And that's a platform for like kind of to connect researchers with the humanitarian practitioners to do empirical research. So that's very important. And like there are lots of researchers from different nationalities, from 17 nationalities, and we are open and also willing to extend our collaboration with the Asian countries, representatives with the Research Institute and NGOs. And there's also a journal of humanitarian logistics and supply chain, and they have two special issues related to COVID pandemic. So the first issue is out. The second one is call for papers for vaccine supply chain. Please check out the website, and then if you are interested, you can submit your work. And there are a couple of projects ongoing on Humanitarian Logistics Research Institute. One of the important one is the HEROES project, which is led and coordinated by Professor Yongi Kovac. She's the founding, actually, member of the HUMLOG Institute, and all she is has got lots of expertise and experience in the field. So, and she led this project. The other project, which is Cash and Carry project, I'm working, and also my colleague Russell working on this project, which is actually supported by Academy of Finland from 2000 since 2019, led by Professor Petrovic, and we focus on delivery of cash and voucher assistance in complex emergencies, specifically looking into the cases of Syrian conflict, which is started from 2011 until now, and also Ukrainian case. And so far we found, like kind of using the literature review and some data collection from the field, a lot of good, empirical insight and evidence based on this, specifically from Syria. And this is just the introductions about our work and research project and HUMLOG Institute. So maybe I want to a little bit introduce about cash and voucher assistance, but I'm sure that you are more, expert, on this area, and then on cash and voucher assistance. If you want to add anything, please just raise your hand and then discuss about this. But maybe if I want to start about this cash and voucher program and its importance, there were like kind of a timeline. I tried to put it in a timeline based on the years. And of course, before 2004, there were like, even in the Second World War, the people used paper vouchers to the soldiers' family. So it's not a very new topic, and it's just a tool, but it depends how to use it. And we found that in research, it's highly context dependent. So it depends on the market, depends on the various factors. Cash and voucher may apply or may not apply. During natural disasters or pandemic, doesn't matter. So it's important to see that in the areas whether everything is functional, how the people, they are kind of prefer to receive cash and voucher. Starting 2004 maybe was a good starting point. During the Indian Ocean tsunami happened. At that time, in Banda Aceh specifically, it was like lots of disruptions in road infrastructure, and it was like kind of debris everywhere, or like kind of waste in the roads, and the buildings were collapsed, so everything were like messed up. And one of the good initiatives were done by Mercy Corps was actually they provide a cash for work program, if you remember. And one of the first document on cash and voucher assistance led to this Indian Ocean tsunami for cash for work program. At that time, 18,000 people were get paid to clean up the roads, to do the recovery, to support the clean up the structures, and also rebuilding the roads and restart the local market. That helps the people when they get the wage on monthly salary base, so they can just purchase their own needs. For example, to get some rice, eggs, oil from the market to just survive. That was the starting point. Of course, that time the cash just paid to the people physically, but was one of the tipping point of the cash and voucher assistance in history. And after that, there was like kind of cash learning partnership initiative, which has happened in 2050, a consortium of humanitarian organizations. And then after that, a lot of documents from academic and also humanitarian organizations published on how to do cash and voucher assistance, what are the feasibility criteria, and how it can be delivered in different contexts. In 2010, the effectiveness of cash and voucher assistance were proved by humanitarian organizations as it can reduce the cost, it can reduce the logistic cost because there is no need for the transportation or warehousing, and there was limited, not no need for the transportation, it was limited. So just people need to travel, for example, to the ATM machine to withdraw cash. And then in 2016, of course, there was a grand bargain, you know, and you're aware of that. In grand bargain, there was like a significant emphasis on the use of cash and voucher assistance. And the same year, there was initiative for electronic cash transfer learning action network was the starting point on emphasizing, for example, how to use digital cash transfer instead of the physical cash transfer. So immediately the number in terms of the volume of assistance in terms of cash increased significantly, which peaked in 2020. And then maybe you have like access to the World State Cash Report. In World State Cash Reports from Cash Learning Partnership, which is published in 2009, 2020, you can see in 2016, there was only 10% of humanitarian assistance allocated in cash and voucher. So it's like $2.6 billion. However, it increased dramatically in 2019. It almost doubled. So 80% of humanitarian assistance delivered in forms of cash and voucher, which is equal to $5.6 billion. That numbers is magnificent. Although it was before COVID-19, there are like certain unofficial reports and documents coming up, which this number increasing, and that it's like an estimation up in 2015, this number will be tripled. So it means that in the future, there will like a humanitarian assistance will shift toward cash and voucher assistance. However, this doesn't mean that in-kind assistance will be ignored. These two are like complementing each other. Again, I emphasize it depends on the context. You have to see that whether it's feasible to provide cash and voucher assistance, either in physical format or in digital format. So the evidence shows that, like this is from the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. You can see here in 2000, between 2017 and 19, up to 8 million Swiss franc of cash and voucher assistance in forms of electronic cash provided to the beneficiaries. So this is totally comparable with the like number, which is they do the physical currency, physical cash payment, which is less than 4 million. So we can see that like just one organization, ICRC, provided cash and voucher in digital format more than 50% of aid. So since 2016 to 2019, and they are like projecting to like more deliver cash and voucher assistance in digital format. So, but that was just an introduction. If I want to just kind of discuss about key challenges experienced specifically during COVID crisis, I may refer to the cash project cycle. You are aware of that. This is the cash project cycle, which is developed by CAL, but of course, IFRC, different organizations, they have their own formats. But if you look into the process for the cash and operation cycle, you can see that logistics has played a key role. Many people say that no, when we shift to cash, logistics is out. It's not like that. Even IFRC or NGOs, they provide training for their logistician how to deliver cash. Because as you can see that there is a assessment, and inside that market assessment is a big job for logistician. They do need to the like a supply chain mapping to see whether the suppliers are available or not in the market. And in the design also, the contract with the financial service provider, the procurement of financial service provider is logistic related. So in the cash project cycle, logistic has a role. So therefore, I use this kind of concept to develop the challenges. I use a model developed from supply chain risk model from Christopher in 2014, and then the challenges can be grouped either to external or internal factors. Externally, actually, we know that, and cash and voucher is very context dependent. So if there is a poor infrastructure, how we can deliver cash and voucher assistance? So normally, during the pandemic, for example, in Syria, the banking and technological infrastructure didn't work well, specifically in the areas affected by war and ongoing war. So there's like lack of ATM machine, mobile money doesn't work. So agencies had like a kind of difficulties to provide cash, and then they have to provide a physical cash at the counter, and which also increased the risk of coronavirus and pandemic. So there was like a couple of issues provided by different organizations, large cluster and UNHCR about the like lack of technical infrastructure, lack of banking systems. And so, and the other things on top of that, the basic kind of infrastructure, electricity, is not in place in certain areas still. Like my hometown in Iran, even like, for example, every week and even every single day, 2 hours, the electricity cut. So there's a shutdown of electricity. So how ATM machine can work? How the people can just transfer the money if there is no internet connections? Of course, they're like offline systems or whatsoever, but these are the basic things which in some countries are even in like maybe vulnerable areas, remote areas, some poor local infrastructure exists maybe in Indonesia or Myanmar. So this is very important factor which need to be considered, and it's very challenging. The other ones, of course, is political issues. So it's like whether the government has interest on the use of cash, digitalization. You know, the digitalization, the people and the financial service provider or implementing actors, they need to access a lot of information, personal bank account, IDs, or whatsoever. So if the government has like kind of inhibit to provide this kind of access to this kind of information, that's very challenging. And a lot of humanitarian organizations try to advocate, try to navigate, and also coordinate with the government, which is a very important role on that. However, the like kind of government interests and also restrictions on bank closure made difficulties for organizations to, for example, distribute ATM cards because the banks were closed during the lockdown. And on the other hand, sanctions, you know that the certain countries affected by sanctions, so the financial service provider are not able to transfer, for example, the money or to provide the services in the countries which like kind of under the sanction list. And this is a huge problem in Syria, it's been a problem in Iran. So there's like a remittances, international bank transfers like delayed or costly, and then you have to rely on the local Hawala brokers, which they are unofficial, some of them. And then the people like kind of rely on the cryptocurrencies using blockchain to like, for example, to use a shortcut under the sanction. This is also challenging and also debatable. The economic downturn during the lockdown, you know that the business failed. There were like inflation, huge inflations in Middle East, in Syria. Prices are doubled for the fuel. So the people want to travel to the ATM machines. The prices were increased. The people laid off from the work, so they lost their salary, so they get survived. So I mean, there was also lack of liquidity. Lack of liquidity was also one of the case for the cash liquidity in Myanmar happened last couple of weeks during the military coups and violence over there. So the people have to queue up in the banks in the early morning to just withdraw cash. And so another issue like a market failure in Syria, Lebanon happened. And then in terms of internal risks, in terms of supply, there were like lack of access, humanitarian organization, they had lack of access to markets and suppliers due to COVID. This is evidence from United Nations University. And also there were like a power of main suppliers. In Lebanon happened, there's like only few suppliers. They provided like kind of big portion of supplies importing from foreign countries to Lebanon and from Lebanon to Syria. That humanitarian organization, they were like kind of challenged. So if they want to provide specifically unrestricted cash and voucher assistance in certain areas with like big suppliers and retailers, so the local retailers will be, for example, out from the market. And this is also mentioned in one of the paper by Vogel. And also there are like a high demand uncertainty. You know that until now, according to World Bank, 1 billion people are undocumented. They don't have official proof of ID or documents. So always it would be challenging for humanitarian organizations to access to the beneficiaries, to their data, to actually, because in Middle East there are lots of informal workforce which are undocumented. So finding them is very problem. And during the Corona, it was extremely challenging and exacerbated to like, for example, to access the location of beneficiaries because they're like a border closed. So the people are like not recommended to go out. They have to do remote work. And that was like crazy. And also the digital payments, not universally accessible, as I mentioned. So they need to like lack of digital literacies among beneficiaries, how to use, for example, digitalizations, like, for example, how to use mobile money in South Sudan. It's like kind of, I have to think about it. And the last issue, of course, is the limited capacity and process failure. There were like a lot of cases reported like on funding cuts due to the corona. So it's like donors try to emphasize and focus on their own country rather than the countries affected by complex emergencies or conflict. And there was like a skilled laborers return to the country due to the lockdown. So if there's like a failure in ATM machine or in IRIS scanning, so there was like local people were not kind of able to fix these problems. And on the other hand, there was issue of the data privacies, which happened in Rohingya refugee based on the Myanmar crisis. There was like kind of some data will be controlled by larger humanitarian organization. They share with other organizations, which actually they could control the kind of where the beneficiaries they go. And there was like a lot of ethical issues on data's privacy and protection were like discussed last time. And these are the kind of challenges which I found from the literature and also discussion with the humanitarian practitioners during the lockdown, which are very important. These external can impact on internal to find out, for example, the supplies, the availability of the local market, the demand, and also the capacity. And then this is the case for like Myanmar, I found from the Reuters news. As I mentioned, the people stay on the queue just to withdraw cash. And there was like a limited ATM machines around in Myanmar, and there was like people have to go early morning to just, because there was like a lack of liquidity of cash from the ATM machines. So, and then also there's like a map of access. You see that the red zones, there's like kind of the countries with the biggest access restrictions in Africa, Yemen, Syria, of course, and some part in Myanmar, in Afghanistan. So it's like humanitarian had like kind of difficulties to access to the market, to the people, to provide their cash and voucher assistance. And this is one of the recent papers we've published. I mean, my colleague, we've discussed that the conflict and that's like areas affected by complex emergencies, they're like a complexity of interrelated factors. So we call them external factors, could be war, could be lack of infrastructure development or extreme event, which impact on the economic, population displacement, and the infrastructure supply. These factors can have unintended consequences in terms of lack of access to basic services, sanitation facilities, and these increase the rate of cholera outbreak in Yemen. So we didn't want to measure all these variables because very complex model, but we wanted to show that in complex emergencies, there are like complex factors. And for humanitarian organizations, in order to have effective decision making, they have to include all these factors. One may not just ignore the purchasing power or the cultural social norms of the people, because the people like in Yemen, they want to go to mosque. They gather together. The kids are playing together in the alleys every day. They are like kind of the risk of this disease outbreak. So they need to look into all these factors together. Certain practical, so I don't want to spend more time on this, on kind of insights from humanitarian practitioners. One, of course, is collaboration and coordination. It has been challenging for the last 2 decades, from Indian Ocean tsunami. So always the organization, they do not actually collaborate. So one key point, success factor is you need to coordinate or collaborate with the partners. And there are like evidence shows that collaboration, coordination can improve the performance. And of course, there are like a couple of different countries, so you can collaborate through the cash working group, for example. And I'm sure that in Asia, there are like different countries. There are the cash working group, country-based and regional-based, Afghanistan, Thailand, Myanmar, Indonesia. They're like a local cash working group available, which like the people can use them. And then adapt the programs based on the context. For example, to have like a flexible mode of assistance. If you cannot deliver cash, you can support in-kind assistance if the market is not available. And through flexible delivery mechanism. And this has been used and practiced by UNHCR with larger humanitarian organizations in the Middle East. But it could be a good example for also in Asian countries. For example, in Jordan, mobile money in 2020 during the lockdown introduced and supported by the government. So humanitarian organizations, they use this opportunity to provide the mobile money cash transfers to the people. However, in Syria, it's not supported by the government, and also the infrastructure not let the people to use the mobile money for some places and regions. So they use, for example, cash distribution, door-to-door cash distribution. They have to use a flexible mode of delivery mechanism, or use the multiple method of the payment, which happen in Congo, like physical cash, mobile money, digital payment via bank. So you can have like a multiple method for like, depends on the context where you can apply it. And then of course, having flexible contract framework with the financial service provider. I won't discuss about this. Russell, my colleague, later we continue discussion about this. And then also for example, pushing the financial service provider to use technologies such as blockchain, and with Severiyos, my colleague, will discuss about it more. And last but not least, improving the logistic capacities to promote, for example, both physical and remote market assessment. Joe Borton in his article said that market assessment, remote market assessment is not enough. You still need to go to the place to see and experience the real needs of the people. During lockdown, it was not really 100% possible, but the people used the referral system, local volunteers, local people to get the data. Of course, this data may not be reliable, but I mean, definitely if you are in the field, you can get more real data accurate. And allocation of multiple distribution sites instead of just one distribution site in one point in order to reduce the risk of corona. So they can allocate mobile ATM distribution across different areas, specifically in remote areas, so the people can withdraw cash, but not also avoid a crowd. And these are the regional cash working group, which I've discussed. You see in different countries, like the blue one, country cash working program, which exists. It is like a network of the humanitarian organization. They share and discuss idea and feedback how to deliver cash in which context. Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, they have country cash working group. Regional cash working group exists in Laos, Thailand, Cambodia. So you can refer to that. My final points, Joe Burton in this article say that do no digital harm. So previously he kind of amended do no harm principles of protections, which is also mentioned in Sphere project, and he rephrased it to do no digital harm. If you are a humanitarian organization, if you want to deliver cash using the digital transfers, you have to make sure that there's no digital harm to the beneficiaries. Thank you very much. I stop my discussion, and then later we can continue with the panel discussion. So I give the floor to my colleague, Russell.
Thank you, Amin. Thank you for that presentation. And once again, we want to welcome everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, if you're just now joining us, wherever you're joining us from. We're glad to have you in this conversation today. As Amin briefly mentioned, my name is Russell Harpring, and I'm also from the HUMLOG Institute. I primarily conduct research related to supply chains and cash and voucher assistance. Before coming here to Finland, I worked with UNHCR in procurement. And so I have that perspective with the research that I do. And the more I conduct research with other organizations, the more I realize that cash and voucher assistance is primarily a cross-sectorial tool. It's a meeting point between economics, logistics, IT, and protection. So while I might come with this supply chain perspective, each function has its own perspective, which makes cash and voucher assistance so dynamic. However, today I wanted to discuss one point in particular about supply chains and cash and voucher assistance. And that's that supply chains don't necessarily just refer to the movement of goods or money, but also to the flow of information. And that last point, the flow of information, it's often overlooked or taken for granted, but it actually facilitates the flows of the other two. So in this brief discussion, I will share some findings and information with you. But following the discussion, we also want to hear from you, the participants, about your experiences from the field. As Amin mentioned, most of us here at the HUMLOG Institute, we have worked with previously with humanitarian organizations or NGOs in the past. And we know the continual resource strain felt at the operational level. So we want to try to work closely with NGOs and organizations to study their processes, because we think that this collaboration between academia and field work, it's how we create better studies and create better information. So one study we started back in 2019 was a review of published studies to understand what key factors influenced outcomes in CVA programming. Essentially, we wanted to ask, what are the different organizations doing that is effective? What is shared, and what commonalities are there? Now, it's important to remember that we viewed this information from a supply chain perspective. The same method could be used, however, to conduct studies on protection outcomes, for example. So there are 6 key components that you can see here in this figure. The first, we have external environment that we have to consider. These are the factors that are largely outside of our control, but they have influences on the decision that we make on the operational level. Now we compare this to the internal environment, which is that inner circle that you see. These are the factors within an organization or network that an organization has control over to some extent. So for example, supply network capabilities, capacities and resources. And then within that, we have three other steps, and that's the content, the context, and the process. And this is how we frame different questions within these. And you can see the content, it's the what questions. What are the program objectives? The context, why will the program be implemented? And the process, how will we implement the program? And then within those three steps, there are different subcategories, and these will lead to the outcomes. So this is how we view different programs. And with respect to CVA programming, looked at the outcomes and how they specifically were shaped by the processes chosen and how the decision to use certain processes were shaped by the context and informed by the content. So this led to a number of findings, but one stood out in particular. And that's that despite the need for cash readiness and preparedness that we are all discussing now, we found that it was the least discussed phase of the disaster management cycle in the case studies and the reports. In our discussions with organizations, they tended to agree with this. They had heard that it's important to be cash ready, and they wanted to be cash ready, but they were just not sure how to go about it. In fact, when we reflect back on Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda in the Philippines, some of the major findings and recommendations related to information sharing, to working with local partners, and predefining needs. Even in one of the most recent Cash Hub webinars hosted by IFRC, the Vietnam Red Cross and the Asia Pacific office discussed promising results of having CVA preparedness in place, especially once COVID-19 came into full swing. So we wanted to take a closer look at this and how CVA preparedness, and we took these ideas forward by linking it to a series of ongoing studies at the HUMLOG Institute. So here we have the disaster management cycle, and it's one of many different versions of it, but we can see the same four phases represented in the previous slide. Three of the ongoing studies here revealed implications for CVA preparedness. The first study, you can see in the lower left-hand corner, is about leveraging climate information for early warnings and action, which is a mitigation measure. The second study in the top right-hand corner is about procurement process modularity during COVID-19. So that took place during the response phase, but looked at the measures that were in place before the pandemic and their subsequent effects. So it was looking at what was done in the preparedness phase and early response phase. And finally, the third study is about joint procurement and CVA preparedness, which I will discuss more in detail. But first, a quick note on the other two studies and how they help to set the stage for the third. In the study about climate information and early actions, it was found that although mitigation measures were in place, they were not carried out in the preparedness phase. In fact, for instance, the sheep herders in Mongolia, CVA was being set up to mitigate the risk of severe weather decimating a flock. So information was collected, the identities, bank accounts, etc. However, when the program went operational, actually 20% of the information that was collected on beneficiaries was incorrect. So it created a lot of rework. And for example, in the second study with process modularity, first process modularity is essentially having predefined modules that can be changed around to improve a system. So think of Lego pieces that can be taken apart and then reassembled to fit the context. We found that in this study, organizations which had these flexible modular processes were able to adapt easier to changes. And this was especially true during the pandemic, when we went and looked at how they adapted their studies to either scale up CVA program during the pandemic or add an in-kind component during the pandemic. But the common trend between these studies was the need for steps to be taken during the preparedness phase And so in the third study, the one about cash and voucher assistance preparedness, we directly assessed features of preparedness in the supply chain networks. So this study took place in Mexico, where there's a cash working group, and at that time it consisted of 5 members and has since grown to 6 members. So each NGO has its own network and some experience with cash. 2 of the larger organizations were more advanced in their programming, and 2 others had just started pilot projects, and 1 actually had never operated CVA programs on their own. In light of this, the cash working group decided to pool resources for a joint tender. And one of the ideas behind this was the network of information that would be shared through the tendering process. So for example, you can see here, this was the lead organization. They had their headquarters in Mexico City and then several hubs spread throughout the country. So this formed a network of how information passed from office to office, both from headquarters to field offices and then back to headquarters. We connected the nodes through their corresponding focal points. So as you may notice, this covers a significant portion of the country, but it doesn't cover the country in its entirety. So one of the drivers behind the decision to lead this joint procurement exercise was to expand the geographic coverage throughout the country. The organization, they understood the local context in which that they worked, but providing CVA coverage in additional areas meant conducting an extensive FSP mapping exercise and really getting to know the markets in those different areas. So with the inclusion of the 4 other NGOs in the cash working group, the coverage now looked like this. Now we were building a network. And I should note that this diagram you see is merely representative. The actual data is much messier. Since many of the nodes have many other connections in between each, I cleaned it up a bit for this presentation. But the point here is that a network of information for each organization was assembled. And so what does this mean for us? What does this mean for humanitarian partnerships? There's a whole set of theorems and calculations that we could use. It's called social network analysis. And we could discover connectivity, centrality, power structures, etc. And for example, centrality could tell us which specific node is able to connect to any other node in its quickest form. However, I don't want to bore you with this. For this discussion, we don't need to go into that level of analysis. There's more practical information we can gain without doing all the math. And that's that first, the fact that each member of the cash working group shared their financial service provider contacts made the mapping exercise much easier, which also increased the competition and responsiveness for the tendering process. Second, market information, suppliers, local procurement options became much more widely available. Third, there's an additional network not shown on the map, but it's the next layer that the local actors and individual implementing partners from each organization, what they added to this. So each of the different colored nodes, it represents one of the different organizations. And you can imagine that each one of those nodes has other partners that they connect to. So when this is done correctly, when partnerships form, this creates a very powerful knowledge database, and that can be used for advanced decision-making. For example, in procurement, when they did this joint tendering process, it helped with the technical and financial specifications and the subsequent evaluation in the tendering process. Anyone who has worked in procurement can tell you that getting the technical specifications right the first time around really helps set the stage for the entire contract period. At the same time, that over-specification can lead to limited competition, and also vague specifications can lead to delivery problems. So in this joint procurement exercise, everyone brought experience to the team, and also from a different angle. So it helps strengthen the specifications through revision and refinement. Many of the organizations would ask each other, why do you do it like that? Or why do you have that requirement in there? And most of the answers would be revealing, either saying, well, that's how we've always done it, or because it's one of our procurement rules. So this exercise led to each organization seeing things differently, more broadly. Additionally, there are other tools that it helped with. For example, on this slide, you can see that this is an overlay of the cellular network coverage in Mexico. So we can start to see how it affects the delivery mechanisms and the modalities that we choose, and which one may be feasible, maybe which one may not be feasible. So this can also be done, of course, with ATM access points, with marketplaces, by showing where shops are, and so on. The point is that information is being shared across the network and can assist not just with one organization, but across many organizations. So even beyond cash and voucher assistance, since CVA is usually delivered alongside in-kind modalities, we can look at, for example, supply routes if partners have information regarding their local suppliers and their suppliers' suppliers. So here we can see the different supply routes, and we can look at the supply chain in its entirety. And then we can also make better informed decisions about whether cash is better in one instance, or whether, let's say, that we can get goods easier in certain marketplaces. There are many advantages to sharing this kind of information, but I just wanted to share some practical examples with you in this presentation. Despite these advantages, however, there are several key challenges that exist in information sharing and also in joint procurement that manifested themselves. Of course, with the cash working group, there are different objectives and needs within each individual organization and within the group. There are also varying no KYC requirements, know your customer requirements, and that applies to both the FSPs and organizations. And trying to sync those to make those work, it can be quite challenging. And then, of course, there's still the mapping, the FSP mapping, which requires time and accuracy. It's consuming, and somebody still must lead the project. In this instance, actually, the responsiveness from the tender was still a key challenge, that despite the fact that we were able to interview many different financial service providers, we still had a limited response because not many FSPs saw the value in participating in the tender, that they still had a very capitalist mindset and didn't really see where they saw more risk involved than what they would get back. So there's still a disconnect, and we can do better in that stage. And then the lack of e-procurement really hindered the process. It slowed it down. Mexico is a country that could have supported e-procurement, but the systems were not in place to carry it out. And finally, data protection. Of course, each organization, as Amin mentioned, we are all concerned with this. And trusting other organizations, we still have a way to go. So as we start talking about these topics, we start to understand the effort required to prepare for CVA programming. And considering the time and budget constraints we are all working against, we believe there must be much more information sharing across these agencies. There is still work to be done before more advanced integration of data can be performed, such as standardization of information, which is collected and shared. And during COVID, it demonstrated the need for cash preparedness to many operations and organizations. So we believe that that greater transparency and local partnerships can help overcome these challenges. So speaking of partnerships, I don't want to go over on time, and we have a very special guest here with us today, and it's our next speaker, Severiyos Aydin of Aidonic. I mean, I may have talked more about theoretical and research-based, but Severiyos has a very excellent presentation about how technology can be utilized more effectively in cash. But it's better to let him explain it. He's the expert on that. So I just want to thank you for your time and your effort that you're doing in the field. Please ask us questions. Please leave us comments. We're always eager to get your feedback. If you would like to connect, here's my email, and we can provide it after the session. However, now, without further ado, I will hand the presentation over to Severiyos, and I hope you enjoy his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Russell. Yeah.
Hello and good morning. I hope you can see and hear me, or see my presentation at least.
Yes, we can see it.
Open.
Yeah.
Just give me 1 second. Here we go. Yeah, thank you so much for my previous presentations, and also thank you HUMLOG Institute and HELiX for having us here with Aidonic to present our digital solution for social fundraising and last mile aid distribution, which is a CVA based technology that we implemented, also powered by blockchain technology, that I want to introduce you and present you within this presentation in the next 10 to 15 minutes. I'm based in Switzerland. My name is Severiyos. I'm the founder of Aidonic. I'm also the founder of the Swiss NGO Aramaic Relief International, where I basically spent the last 9 to 10 years in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Jordan, South Sudan, and Uganda, executing and coordinating humanitarian and development programs, mainly for war victims, war-affected people, displaced families, but also vulnerable, poor communities. During that time, I basically gained experience, but also insights in complex humanitarian contexts, and saw potential how we can basically tackle these challenges by introducing and implementing technical solutions, digital solutions. And Aidonic was born in 2018, where we conceptualized the idea and then prototyped and created an MVP and tested it for the first time in 2019 in Syria, but then also just recently extended the technology, launched the version 1.0. It's up and running. It can be accessed via our web-based platform website, but also it can be also licensed for larger organizations and implemented into their organizations. So how does Aidonic work, and how is the technology basically supplementing and solving some of the challenges? We are not solving all the problems. There's like a whole complex area of issues, but this is basically what we introduce and how we can assist currently humanitarian organizations. Aidonic is basically a component, a platform with two main components. The first mile component, which is more the fundraising and helps organizations to raise donations. And the last mile, which is basically our innovation that runs on the blockchain, which is the tokenization of aid. The last mile part is basically the moment where funds that has been raised can be tokenized into individual digital assets or a digital representation of aid, such as food vouchers, cash, entitlements, and those can be sent directly to the beneficiaries. And to make that all possible, we decided to create an ecosystem of all actors within a humanitarian context. And the actors that we provided and created specific roles for are mainly the verified organizations, which is the most important actor on the platform, which can use all the features and functionalities on Aidonic. These are humanitarian organizations, INGOs, NGOs, charities, foundations that can raise funds on Aidonic from a crowd on the platform, establish a communication channel through our social media features, and then send the raised donations as tokenized aid to the beneficiaries that are predefined in each campaign. Then we do have an implementing partner role. And this is again, entities, charities, communities, groups of people that can be, just a second, that can be onboarded as well. We never wanted to exclude any actor. And we know that in most of the cases, international organizations are working very closely and are reliable on implementing and executing partners within a project country. And here we also solving with these two organizations or these two roles, the coordination and the connection problem, with introducing a connection feature between an international organization and implementing partner, where they can digitally connect and support each other's campaigns and causes. The service provider role are entities, businesses, any kind of business that provides goods and services to the international organizations and to the beneficiaries. This can be supermarkets, hospitals, schools, pharmacies, banks, any type of entities. Then we do have implemented the donor role, which can be a private donor or an institutional donor. They are basically the ones who provide funding. And we are also solving here another problem with unlocking private sector capital to fund the gaps in humanitarian programming. And the donors, they can on the platform live track their donations. And what Aidonic solves as one of the biggest challenge is complete end-to-end transparency with increasing trust by tracking and tracing all the funds down to the beneficiaries in the target countries. The beneficiary profile is another very important role that is equipped with a QR code that represents the digital wallet of a beneficiary. And this can be also printed out by a managing organization in case of a beneficiary that do not have a smartphone or internet connection. We introduced offline solutions as well. The ambassador or influencer role are more a communication and marketing role for famous people that can be that can invite their followers on Instagram or Facebook to support the causes and campaigns. And I would like to take you through a typical cycle of a pilot project in South Sudan, where we basically distributed digital food vouchers to beneficiaries. And it starts everything with the cause creation and the onboarding of the beneficiaries. This is basically the assessment stage in the very beginning of a programming. And during the assessment, the organizations can basically create a cause to raise awareness. And to create the cause, they are defining some key parameters describing what the problem and the challenge is, in which area, which category, and allocates the beneficiaries of each cause, basically the people that are getting the support or they're looking for support and need within this specific cause. Once the cause is created, an organization can publish it and gain followers. They can collect people and likes and shares to be ready for an official campaign cycle. And the official campaign stage is basically the moment where additional features are entered, and an organization can here define two funding options. They can choose between a self-funding campaign where, for example, they are institutionally funded and they do not need to raise funds from the crowd on Aidonic, or they can choose the crowdfunding funding option, basically to raise funds on Aidonic and digitally distribute them immediately to the end beneficiaries. How does that work? We go through 19 steps where we collect all informations and data, and by allocating the previous created cause, it defines already the beneficiaries who will get the aid through this campaign. We are offering 17 different categories of aid and development programs, from food, water, health, until arts, culture, economic development. And within these parameters here, by defining the service provider, we are basically creating for each campaign a unique digital asset token. That is basically the representation of 4 options here, 4 forms of aid. We can tokenize vouchers, cash, a product or a product set, and services, such as an educational course or a treatment in a hospital. We can also tokenize a food parcel or a piece of bread or a meal. And by tokenizing vouchers and cash money, we are more providing multi-purpose payment options to the beneficiaries. By defining the service providers, we are restricting the use of the tokens or of the vouchers by 1 to multiple service providers and shops, pharmacies, supermarkets, whatever program is needed for. And by defining the amount per beneficiary, we're limiting it to the use of the amount per beneficiaries. And then when the campaign is ready, the organizations can launch it It goes into a fundraising process, in case it's crowdfunding, raises the funds from the crowd, and then automatically digitize the funds. We transform the funds into digital asset tokens and send them to the beneficiaries, where they can use them in the local markets as with a QR code. And how did we introduce and implement the blockchain part? We basically store every single transaction on the blockchain to make the platform completely immutable. Transactions, payments cannot be altered. They're completely transparent and trackable in real time. All the stakeholders, donors, organizations, and actors that are involved within one campaign can track the distribution of the digital asset tokens, the representation of aid to the beneficiaries, and then from the beneficiaries to the service providers. And that looks basically like this. This is the mobile version. It's a responsive website that acts also like an application. This is the moment of the redemption phase when the beneficiaries receive their digital asset tokens. So they are basically do not even realize that they're operating on a blockchain, because we created an interface that is very user-friendly. So they have their digital wallet on their smartphone or on their physical card. This was the pilot in South Sudan, where we distributed food vouchers, food meals, daily food meals to vulnerable people in a school in Yei. And by transacting and scanning the QR code, it's happening in entry in real time. So when they would receive the funds, the service providers, and hand out the food to the beneficiaries, it immediately sets an entry on the blockchain that can be tracked and traced by all the actors, and for example the donors. They can really see that their funds that has been raised reached the end beneficiaries. We are currently also using this technology in Lebanon within a livelihood program, where we are basically trying to support local mini markets that lost revenue and income due to the lockdowns, due to the pandemic and the restrictions. They lost income. People that are vulnerable, they could not afford their food anymore or hygiene. So what we try to do with this problem to solve the two sides problem, we support and equip beneficiaries with digital food vouchers or digital multi-purpose vouchers, and connect them to the local supermarkets or mini markets that are affected by the pandemic. And while the beneficiaries can go to these mini markets and buy whatever they want, these mini markets get basically cashed out based on the goods that they're sold. And we can again live track every single transaction from the beneficiaries to these mini markets. And based on the data, based on the blockchain entries, we have a verified amount that we use for paying out the mini markets and restoring their revenues and helping them back on the feeds. The Aidonic platform brings with it lots of features and benefits. I don't want to deep dive into all the details, but it provides inclusion, digital inclusion, not only to the beneficiaries, but also to small businesses, micro businesses, farmers, for example, that want to sell their goods and services to the beneficiaries through NGOs. They can also register, and Aidonic is basically also an impact marketplace. Nurses or doctors or psychosocialists, they can also register and offer their services on the Aidonic platform. It is the first digital platform that introduces end-to-end transparency from fundraising to the last mile distribution of aid. And it strengthens also the resilience and supports the UN with reaching the 17 SDGs by 2013, with the increase of funding through increasing trust and helping organizations to become more digital and inclusive. The platform is up and running. You can reach out to us. We're happy to introduce you and onboard you on the platform. It's free to use, unless you want the white label software as a service of Aidonic, which can be also integrated independently from the global platform into your own systems. And for every questions, any support, any assistance, we are more than happy to help you and reach out to us. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Severiyos. Very, very interesting presentations. I really enjoy. I hope our guests, the audience definitely enjoyed. And thank you also for Russell presentations. So now we have around 22 minutes for a panel discussion. And I've seen there are a couple of good questions raised from the audience. Perhaps we can look into the questions, and then if there are like extra questions, we can discuss together. Okay, it's the first question is which is from Chihiro, which is the different points to consider between man-made, natural disasters, and complex situations, or shouldn't be considered. Maybe I answered this. Actually, the nature of disaster is very important before implementation of cash and voucher assistance. We found from a couple of academic papers that, like, for example, in like situations affected by war, then normally the market is collapsed at the beginning. So, and also the people are not like able to access to the market. So cash and voucher assistance perhaps is not a good option at the beginning. Later on, once the market is like kind of available, the people are like having access to the market, so cash and voucher may apply. However, compared to like natural disasters, I may say that natural disaster, for example, there's like a sudden onset earthquake or a tsunami. So maybe the same scenario is like repeated during the response. There's like depends on whether this like market is collapsed or failed or not. So I think humanitarian practitioners need to look into the nature of disaster, which is very important before implementations. Russell or Severiyos, you want to add anything to this?
I think you covered it pretty well. Just yeah, the access to markets, it can be a constraint. The logistical access also, for example, road access can be a constraint. And then the availability of goods and services in the different disaster types. What does the economic situation look like? And how do the beneficiaries, how can they access the markets? I think that those can fit into the different categories of disaster types. So in one hand, yes, it matters. In the other hand, no, it does not matter, because you have to look at what your individual constraints are per context.
Yes, exactly. The question from Benedict: what is the best way to find out how much amount of cash or voucher value is good to be given per affected family? I may say that mostly humanitarian practitioners refer to minimum expenditure basket, which is a standard like kind of requirement for the calculation per family. Okay, in this region or country, or it's like a village, so like a monthly basis. So like how much the people need, for example, to buy food, like the basic items. So there is like, I think the checklist from Cash Learning Partnership, you can refer to that to estimate the value. However, this need to be adjusted with the currency, the local currency, and also inflation in the market. If they are increasing on prices, this calculation need to be adjusted. Severiyos, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I mean, that's very different from assessment to assessment. Sometimes it's also related to the funding that is available. I mean, we personally, with my organizations, we always try to cover at least 1 month of supplies for a family. So that is how we basically assessed or created the size of an amount for a food voucher or for a parcel, that we try to cover at least a month of aid, but then having it also considered with the funding and the resources that were available.
Yeah. And especially during the coronavirus, the funding were like kind of limited. Humanitarian organizations, they have had difficulties. So they reduced the amount, but to just, I mean, to keep the coverage, because you cannot, okay, say, okay, this family, we don't need to provide them the cash and voucher assistance. So they reduce amount to at least to cover the people like their targeted beneficiaries in the groups. But definitely they can revert to the minimum expenditure basket in each country, and it's different. So need a calculation for that. So the second question is that, is there any case you have experienced where the same affected family received multiple cash and voucher from some organizations? How do you see that this? I may say that this is happening, of course. Due to the incoordination, lack of coordination between partners, normally the like a families receive, last time also happened in a Kermanshah earthquake in the Iran-Iraq border. They're like the same family, they receive lots of like kind of cash and voucher assistance to purchase, for example, tent or pay the rental. And they're like government questions, so why they're not like coordinate between the like local agencies and also international humanitarian organizations. So this is happening. And one approach can be like get to know, I mean, coordinate more with the local state authorities to see that who are the actors are also involving in order to reduce the duplication of efforts, duplication of like giving multiple cash to the same family. Yeah, that's a very big challenge. Next questions. How, from Susie, how can we implement CVA in traditional society where the people are rarely to use electronic cash or even cash? Should we change their paradigm? Maybe Severiyos, you had the experience in South Sudan, which is rarely people use digital things. So I wonder, maybe you share your experience about like kind of digital literacy of the local people and how you actually tackle this or overcome this challenge.
Yeah, it was a great experience, and basically it was also good learning. It's very interesting for us as where I was, very rural places in Uganda or South Sudan, but also in the Middle East. I was working in places with very low connectivity, villages that were outside urban areas where people were affected. But it was always interesting. People used smartphones. Lots of people used WhatsApp or Facebook or Instagram, mainly the young people. So, and the interesting thing was they're very open to learn digital solutions. They're very open to learn and use digital applications, and they're very open to implement and to change the way they're basically get support. In South Sudan, we didn't have. We thought we reserved a lot of time for training and introducing, but that was in the end the shortest stage of the whole cycle that we need to invest time in, because the people were so open and very happy to learn how the Aidonic distribution technology works. So
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. I think it was a great learning also to see that in very low connectivity areas, people with no access to internet, and some people also with the old GSM phones that could implement and use technology. I mean, it's always very important how you implement an idea or a digital solution into a real life use case technology that can be implemented and used. And that is based on the features, on the user friendly. How do you also coordinate the transactions? How do you implement the assessment part with the transactions and onboarding the beneficiaries and the service providers and teaching them to use this kind of solutions? So
Yeah.
I think they're quite open and they're very happy to learn new stuff and applications that they're already used to since they're using others.
Thank you.
Great.
Very
Since
good
you're
feedback. Yeah.
Since you're going on that note, Severiyos, I just saw one of the questions popped up in the chat that maybe we can jump to is just how would you elaborate more on how your apps work in limited access areas? And was it to synchronize later on with good internet access in the area, or how did that actually work and what challenges were presented?
So in South Sudan, the connection was very bad, but the problem was also they were disconnected permanently. So they had some hours of no connectivity at all. And the interesting thing is the people there, so the school in Yei, they are organized themselves already, even with other operations they do, with other things they do. Sometimes they need internet for teaching the kids and showing them something in the internet. So they know exactly which hours. They do the assessment according to the time when there is an availability connection. And Aidonic is basically created in a way that we only use very, very low amount of transaction bytes for affecting the transaction, the payment from the beneficiaries to the service providers. And that was working very well in South Sudan because we are basically just transacting a very low size amount of bytes that can be, with the worst internet connection, even be possible. That was positive, but also with Aidonic, an organization can print out the QR codes and create physical card wallets for the beneficiaries that do not have a smartphone. And Aidonic is basically created that only the service provider needs an internet connection, and it's enough to have a very low rate internet connection. And only the service provider, when he scans the QR code, it sends an entry to the blockchain, and this message that sends that generates the blockchain entry is, as I just said, a very low bytes rate transaction and movement. So it was working very well, and we used the time frame where we knew, okay, there is internet connection and connectivity. So
I guess
in the Middle East, it was much easier because the connection was much better, the coverage was better, and we didn't face lots of challenges, but there it was easier.
Yeah, but still, like in Middle East, like electricity costs, that's a tough challenge on the basic infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's like case by case, varies across the regions and countries. And also the low byte rates, I guess it can comply with the environmental concerns about the cryptocurrencies and using blockchain, because there are like a lot of firms mining Bitcoins and running different tokens, Ethereum or whatsoever. And they were like kind of big concern, okay, about, because they use a high amount of electricity consumptions. They are not very environmentally friendly. But you mentioned about the low byte rates, maybe low consumptions. So I'm not sure, it's like maybe technical issues, but I think, that's very important to consider.
This is the transaction that gives the API call, that gives the call to the platform, to our database, and tells them, look, there is a transaction happened. But talking about the gas consumption for the use of the blockchain and make the blockchain network workable, we basically also there used a very eco-friendly blockchain, which is the Stellar blockchain that does not consider any mining and gas, which is basically working with another consensus protocol, a consensus of authority code, which does not require gas. We are basically build our platform, our decentralized application on top of the Stellar blockchain because of this reason.
Perfect. And I refer back to the previous questions about how to use this kind of cash in a traditional society. I may add that that's like humanitarian practitioners, even they provided kind of services and training, as Severiyos mentioned, to improve the literacy of people, how to use digital cash, how they can transfer, how they can receive it, and how they can, for example, spend it in the supermarket. Still, in rural areas where the people are not able to go to the shops, they may be disabled or elderly people, they still need to consider flexible modes of assistance. This can be come together or complemented with in-kind assistance. or it can be complemented with, for example, physical cash handouts, which happen. So maybe there is a shift to the digital transfers, but training should be provided, the campaign awareness. This is part of the like kind of implementation programs together with the CVA programs, with the humanitarian organizations' responsibility, and of course the government. Okay, let's go to the next questions from, to Aidonic. How do you ensure the security of user data token from the data breach? So, yeah.
The security aspect when creating a technology like Aidonic was very high. We really put a lot of efforts and a focus on that. So when talking about data token, I guess the question is more about the digital asset token that are stored on the blockchain. So how we basically did that is we do not save any private personal data on the blockchain. We store the public key that it can correspond with the beneficiary on our database. So there is never any private or personal data on the blockchain itself, but just a reference where we can allocate and know that this is basically the reference to this beneficiary, that their data are basically protected within our database. And we worked very closely with the cybersecurity company, a very leading one that makes an assessment and cyber check and penetration tests on banking software. So for us, it was very important to find all the potential vulnerabilities and then solving them and introducing them and close the gaps so that any data breach is not possible with Aidonic. And we are basically continuously working with cybersecurity companies, also internal security people, to introduce full security and safety, also by design, not only by technical infrastructure, but also by design with using the features. How can be the data protected by not sharing them with any third parties that could basically make use of them? So that is also all protected by design and by technical infrastructure.
Yeah, and data privacy is a very big responsibility of those implementing partners and actors who provide assistance to the people, because they need to sometimes share with the financial service provider very private data. So this is not maybe like a kind of concern, may be of concern of the beneficiaries at the last mile. So thank you for your answer. And to Aidonic, is Aidonic available in all countries?
Yeah, Aidonic is accessible worldwide by all countries, and everyone can just simply log in and use the technology. Every organization that wants to use it needs to go through a KYC process, but it's available in all countries worldwide.
Okay. From Rahmat, is there a mechanism to ensure the cash is used as per plan? I guess there are like a post-distribution monitoring platforms, and it is like guidelines from IFRC, ICRC, and CALP, which they have like a checklist you can check on when you monitor. I mean, when you distribute the cash and voucher assistance, you can monitor whether it's as planned or not. However, this checklist need to be modified and customized based on the context. So in certain cases, so there is no like kind of definite written plan, but you can use some standards from CALP or IFRC as a guideline. I'm not sure whether I answered your question, so it's like kind of very open.
Well, Severiyos, do you have any examples from your?
Yeah, so actually it's very interesting because everyone talks about the cash. However, there are organizations, they distribute cash, but they have a clear idea for the beneficiaries what to do with the cash. So sometimes they tell them, this is for food and hygiene or medications. Sometimes they tell them, this is for rent, take cash and you pay. But there is no mechanism to ensure or to make sure that they really spend the money for what is intended for. Or even if they distribute them and tell them, look, you build your business with the cash, this is a small micro grant. However, with Aidonic, you can really you cannot restrict the use of the digital cash with the technology. You can do that, but you can also really target those specific areas or types of business by creating a digital representation of the cash that is allocated to multi-purpose of or multiple service providers. This is how you can really make sure that the cash is really used for what is intended for. Or you can make sure that you can see and track for what they spend the digital money. You can really have their a last mile security with the context of the use that it's been meant for. So we with technology, it is definitely possible to monitor that much easier.
Yeah, thank you. So the next question from Edwin. Is it better to provide assistance via mobile money instead of actual cash? That's it's not about it's better or not. Maybe I said it's very context dependent. Some cases, for example, in Congo, ICRC applied multiple methods for cash transfer using mobile money in certain areas, also physical cash in other areas, and also the bank card, debit card to withdraw ATM cash from ATM machines. I guess it's very context dependent. We can't say that mobile money is better. It's the last option, better option, definitely. Of course, mobile money can reduce the cost. It's very easy. Everyone now is like now over 60% of the population around the world, they have smartphones based on statistics. So it's like very easy to access. So everyone, they can use just the smartphone they carry on everywhere. However, it's not the only alternative. So maybe Severiyos, you have you want to add something?
No, I basically agree with what you said. It's the very context is very different. It's also depending on the infrastructure in the specific countries, on the available technical but also economical infrastructures. The cost is an important aspect. What is cheaper, what is better, what is more efficient. But yeah, I mean, with simple cash, the potential of fraud or misuse is also higher, I think. Having a digital solution, it can really avoid any potential mismanagement a lot. So that aspect is also to be considered.
And also during the coronavirus, due to the social kind of distancing and also no physical cash, it was not a very good option, just you could just carry on cash and then give to the people, and then in the distribution side, lots of long queues for the people to just get the cash from the counter, and that's kind of increase the risk of coronavirus among the population. So digitalizations can improve and reduce this kind of contact disease outbreaks also. But yeah, it's definitely humanitarian organization need to be flexible using multiple methods depending the context. The last questions from Edwin again. As you identify several challenges from joint procurement activities, is there any solutions on this? Russell?
Well, yes, there were a number of challenges that were presented, but at least in this case, in Mexico, the fact that they had begun to do this collaboration and coordination, that was already attacking some of these challenges. The fact that 4 of the organizations already had cash programs in place meant that they could still rely on those cash programs while they're conducting this joint procurement exercise. So of course, you have to move quickly with procurement and doing this joint procurement. It did move slowly, but this was going to be a 5-year contract. So you're really setting up for the next 5 years, which was going to be a long time. So they wanted to do it right. And they could rely on the contracts that were already in place and use that experience to make a stronger program for the future. So I think that the more you do these partnerships, the more partnerships that form, the better you get at it, the more experience you have in procurement, and you can move more quickly in the future, and you can see what we did worse one time, what we did better this time, and move forward from there. But you were right, Edwin, that there is a balance to be struck between beneficiaries, donors, and the organizations. But yes, I see we're running low on time.
Yes, sorry, since we are like running out of time, we have like extended the time for like 8 more minutes to just wrap up our discussion, and also recommend some key takeaways which can be applied to Asian countries. So Asian countries are affected normally by natural disasters, but also conflict in certain areas such as Myanmar. So perhaps we can wrap up discussions. So today we try to discuss like kind of cash and voucher during Corona pandemic also can be applied, can be continued, and also increased to larger amount. We cannot say that how much per family. This is need the calculation per like for example per family using the minimum expenditure baskets framework and adjusted to the local currency and inflations. There are lots of challenges. As I mentioned, cash and voucher is very context dependent, and it's just a tool to apply. Before that, you need to go through the cash feasibility criteria. It doesn't matter, it's like in Asian countries, what kind of disasters happen. If the market infrastructure applies, the government has interest, the donors have interest, suppliers are available, retailers, you have to consider micro, small retailers, and also the big suppliers. So if everyone available and also you have access to the market, the people have to access to the market, can be applied. But yeah, the checklist need to be just used. Severiyos, you have like empirical evidence based in like African countries and Middle East. Any takeaways can be applied also to the Asian countries?
Absolutely. I think some of the contexts that we implemented pilots with Aidonic are very similar to Asian countries. So actually, we are also working now very closely with in Bangladesh, and we have also from India lots of applications for the use of the technology, but also further down. Aidonic can be implemented pretty fast. It is cheap. It is completely for free to use the global platform. It can really assist the organizations on the ground with a lot of things and solve many challenges on the fundraising, but also on the last mile transparency, on the last mile distribution part of a program cycle. And we are more than open and happy to assist anyone that is interested to run a free pilot with Aidonic, but also assist in consulting and in any other aspects when it comes to digital cash and voucher systems and platforms. And thank you very much, HUMLOG Institute, for having us also in this session. It was great. It was very informative and very fruitful takeaways. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was our pleasure, Severiyos.
Russell, you want to add any points to this?
No, nothing. I think that you all wrapped it up pretty well. Just to kind of piggyback on what Severiyos was saying, that we as HUMLOG Institute, we are also very open to partnerships, and we want to strengthen the collaboration between research and between what is going on in the field. So please contact us with your experiences, and we are very open to partnerships. So we would like to hear from you. So please give us some feedback. So thank you again.
Yes. Thank you, Russell. Yeah, for the last comments, I really appreciate to AHA Center and also HELiX event teams, our support, chat team support, Verosa also. So they just organize this event and then help us to like present our research work. We are, as Russell mentioned, we are very open to collaborate and partner with the Asian countries, research institutes, and their humanitarian practitioners. We are very closely connecting with the practitioners. So our research is more like based on empirical evidence, closing partners with the private companies as well. So this is a very good opportunity to collaborate. My last point is that CVA is not a one-fit-solution toolkit. So it's like humanitarian organizations need to be very flexible and adaptable. So make these programs fit to the like kind of context due to if this like infrastructure, everything is available, it can work. So they need to also improve the literacy of the people, how to use digital, for example, cash transfers. This is my last comments, and thank you very much. And thank you also Academy of Finland to support this project, Cash and Voucher Assistance based in Middle East and also Southern Europe. If you have any further comments and questions, please do reach out through our email and websites. So you can just search on HUMLOG Institute website. So it's like I can also share with you. So you can go through the more details about our institute and our research projects. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
For ladies and gentlemen, the participants, you may post your feedback, any comments. If you still have any burnout question, you can type your question in the following link that I share with you in the chat box. I am sure you're still curious about this CVA and blockchain stuff. And thank you very much, Dr. Maghsoudi, Mr. Severiyos, and Russell, for the discussion. It was great, and I really enjoy the intimate discussion, and we hope that we can implement this in the future in the ASEAN region. Thank you so much again. Don't forget to visit our site in helix.ahcenter.org. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.